speaking of, games that are floundering, Marvel's Avengers so far is not doing very well, at least in terms of the mainstream media. Now, most of the really big mainstream sources, they have not given the reviews yet because most of them should know better because it's a live service game and you can't really review the game after like a couple of days of playing it because there was a lot of content and a lot of gameplay to go with it, including the end game. But the majority of people that have come out already and talked about it have not been very positive. And we've seen plenty of videos on YouTube. I've seen plenty of comments on Reddit. And a lot of the gist of what I'm hearing is that the game is actually pretty good and the story is pretty good, but it's really hard to enjoy that when the repetition and the over the top, like clearly trying to get you to spend money on it with the battle passes for each character and all the outfits and all these things, it's just not making it an enjoyable game. So when you have things like, say, this, which is the, I believe, Virgin outfits, the Virgin Media outfits, because, they're selling themselves out to basically every company out there because everybody's got to get in on that Avengers money because everybody knows that's the biggest property probably in media right now. It's very obvious that this game was made with that in mind as well. Now, I don't pretend to know everything that's going on, right? I don't pretend to understand every decision that's made because I'm not behind those doors. But I have a really, really keen eye for bullshit because I've played so much live service games now. And I played the beta, and I've said this before on the podcast. I did 3 missions, and that was all I could muster. It was that boring. I couldn't get into it. And not to mention, but all the gear, because I'm a big Destiny guy. Destiny was my big game at the time when it comes to live service games. I've played a bit of Division and Division 2, things of that nature, but Destiny was my core. I played probably in total between D1 and D2 about 3,000 hours worth. And I can tell you that everything about Avengers right now is everything bad about D1. Because there's a lot of loot that doesn't do anything. There's a lot of loot that's meaningless. The missions are very repetitive. And the amount of grinding is pretty surreal. It's pretty bad. And at least a first-person shooter, in my opinion, you can get a lot more out of in that format because you do feel a little more sense of control, whereas a beat 'em up, you have to be in a very specific spot, you have to hit specific combos. There is a lot more freedom of movement with Destiny because you can be at long or short range. If you're Hulk, you have one range. You have to play in a certain format. If you're Iron Man, yeah, you can fly around, although the flying is pretty bad. I really hate the flying controls for Iron Man in that. Black Widow does have a gun, but it's very limited as well. Like, everything has like a bit of a gimmick and a bit of long range, but not really as much as you'd like it to. And because of that, I really believe that this game could have been good under a different format. I think the second it became a live service game, and I know that because the second they said it was going to be a live service game, I cringed because I knew that it was going to be what it's turned out to be. Because most live service games are not there to be good games. They're there to get you to stay long enough that you spend a pretty decent sum of money on stuff. And that's the thing I'm worrying about with Outriders as well, which has also impressed me because it looks like Destiny, but in third person. In this case, with Avengers, it clearly looks like it was a money-making machine with all the costumes, with all the various currencies that they have in this game. And that's the kind of thing that I would anticipate that a company just trying to milk their core audience is trying to do. And it's a real shame. Because this game, if it had been, say, just the missions and just online co-op, like just a story, without all the levels, without all the loot, without all the costumes, because nothing that you get changes the look of your characters. The only way that it changes is you have to like finish certain pathways. You have to unlock the costume. It's not like Destiny where you can get a different headpiece, different chest piece, different gauntlets, different boots. All that stuff doesn't exist. You just are stronger. When I played the beta, I couldn't believe that. I'm looking every time I get new loot. I'm thinking, okay, cool. I wonder what this looks like. And it doesn't change anything. I'm just more powerful. That kind of defeats the purpose of loot. Like even with Borderlands, it's just guns, but they're guns that you can see and they're guns that do things differently, whether it's different elements, whether it's some have explosive shells, some, you get what I mean, right? Whereas with Avengers, like, all you're doing is changing a stat number, and that doesn't mean anything. That doesn't mean anything at all. It just means that, oh, you can probably handle this thing better. That's really it. And that's not what I anticipate when I play a game that's a live service. I want to feel like I'm progressing. Progressing doesn't mean that I do slightly more damage. Progressing means that I look different. You play any MMORPG like World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy XIV, you're constantly changing your look because it's better armor, because it's a better setup. Your weapons are better. You're always changing stuff until you get to like the end game where you're looking for that specific piece. But if you're making your way through the course of the game, you're getting better loot, which means you're looking differently. In this case, you're not doing that at all. So the core thing about what makes these games fun, I guess, to play as you progress, it's not there anymore. So, it just comes down to, what are we doing? What are we actually doing? And that's why I'm kind of hoping that this rating gets worse. I really do. I want it to be worse. I want this to be below 70. I really, really hope that the mainstream outlets like IGN and GameSpot don't come out with their reviews and do what they usually do, which is give it an 8 or an 8.5 or even a 9 if, they really, really want to be charitable to it. Because they get better weight on Metacritic, which would really pump up the rating. I hope that these guys give this a 7 like it actually probably is at best, and make sure that that rating stays down. Because people need to understand that just because it's got an Avengers label slapped on it doesn't mean it's amazing. I mean, we've known for the longest time. I mean, for God's sakes, how many times did movie tie-in games come out and they were always terrible? How many times? Like, every Marvel game for a long time was horrible. Hulk, Iron Man, like, they were all bad. Basically good comic book games was like the Batman series, like the Rocksteady games. That was about it. We're getting a little bit better now. It was the same with like games as movies. Like, you knew that they were always going to be bad. And now all of a sudden we have Detective Pikachu, Sonic the Hedgehog, and stuff like that, so we're getting better. People need to understand that this game, even though that it is, quite honestly, the framework I think is actually really good. I really do think that there's a quality game in here if they just did it differently. If they literally just did this as straight story, no loot, like maybe you just unlock like costumes as you go, it might have worked. But because of the absolute shady practices with all the currencies, with all the outfits that you have to unlock, some of the things you can buy, it's pretty obvious that this was not meant to be a game that people would enjoy. Rather, it was meant to be a game that people would spend money on. And they said that they wouldn't have you pay for DLC or stuff, and I'm sure they'll stick to that. But they're going to find every way that they possibly can to get you to spend any amount of currency on there. And that's a real damn shame, because this is a game that a lot of people had high hopes for. And it's not turning out to be that.